Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and I specifically want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and Dungeon Master changes to Dungeons and Dragons that are demanded by Matt Forbeck's 2023 Marvel Multiverse role-playing game. And the first one is a one-page character sheet. So first of all, why am I even talking about this today? Well, so over the last few years, I've thought a lot about tabletop role playing games, and if you were to look at my library shelves, you will see literally probably 20, no less than 50, no more than 100 unique um, tabletop role playing games that I have the core rule book for, right? And I don't regret that journey, but they are dust in the wind to me now. They're a waste, right? And the reason why is, as I've really thought about tabletop role playing games over the years, what I realized is that tabletop role playing games are simply Dungeons and Dragons. The world has had this conversation, and they're like, hey, the muggles of the world have had this conversation, and they're like, listen, nobody cares about what you guys are doing over there. You guys care deeply about it. We're fully aware of it, right? And we're not going to dismiss your group as a whole because you guys are you're all charismatic, intelligent, and confident. So you're a group that's difficult to ignore. But we definitely are going to ignore the fact that there are any tabletop role-playing games beside Dungeons & Dragons. We barely have enough bandwidth in our head to acknowledge that's it. This is the best way to say this. The world is saying there is not a tabletop role-playing game industry. The world only acknowledges Dungeons & Dragons. And frankly, I think, I've reached a point where that's the only game I acknowledge, right? All that exists in tabletop role-playing games is D&D. And I know the OSR and the Indies hate to hear this. They hate to hear this, right? You're like, wait a second, Scott. Kelsey Dionne's Shadow Dark RPG made $1.3 million on his Kickstarter. Doesn't matter, okay? And so the only real role-playing game in the world is Dungeons & Dragons. And I think the rest of the TTRPG community needs to acknowledge this, because the reality is, like, I love index card RPG. Nobody wants to play it, right? Like that's what I learned over the last few years, right? And so if I can try to drag people to the game I love, or I can put D&D on the table and people float to it like bees to pollen, right? Like it's done. It's how it works, right? Okay, so why am I talking about Marvel Multiverse RPG? Well, here's the kicker. Marvel Multiverse RPG is Dungeons and Dragons, in my humble opinion, right? And I hear people like, wait, what are you saying there? So here's why I believe this, right? So first of all, Marvel Multiverse RPG is a role-playing game that matters, right? And I can't say it's not Dungeons and Dragons, but it has inherited the legacy of Gary Gygax. And that's why, in my opinion, there are now, in the middle of 2023, there are 2 role-playing games that matter. And that's all that matter. That's it. Like, you can take your Call of Cthulhu, you can throw it in a lake. It doesn't matter, right? Like, you can take your Shadowrun and throw it in a lake. These don't matter, right? Now, they might matter at some point, because you can take any of these games and you can take the source book the core rule book for them, and you can run them with Dungeons & Dragons. And then you can get people to possibly play them, right? Like, but this is where we've landed, right? But Marvel Multiverse role-playing game is distinctly different and new, right? And it matters. Now, first of all, why does it matter? Because it inherits Gary Gygax's legacy. Why? Because its name is listed on page 2, exactly like Dungeons & Dragons. And Dungeons & Dragons is literally listed on the cover, right? Like, if you pick up a PHB, you will find Gary's name listed on page 2, and you will find Dungeons & Dragons listed on the cover. If you pick up a Marvel Multiverse RPG, you will find Gary Gygax's name listed on page 2, and you will find Dungeons & Dragons listed on the cover, right? Like, this is not an accident. This was very specifically, calculatedly done, right? Like, this is the first game that says, all that matters is D&D. The entire thing is structured like D&D. Laid out. All the writing is like D&D. The layout is like D&D. And the design is like D&D. And you're like, Scott, are you sure about that? Matt Forbeck literally edited Gary Gygax's work directly next to him, right? So that's the issue. This is where this lands, right? This all matters because for the first time ever, a game is actually inheriting Gary Gygax's legacy, and that game is Marvel Multiverse RPG, and it demands change in the current Dungeons and Dragons milieu from Dungeon Masters. Wait. Why buy Dungeon Masters, Scott? Why not just buy by the designers? Shouldn't the designers see what's been done in Marvel Multiverse RPG and then change it? Well, it's logical what you're saying, not quite. Okay, here's why, right? Core rulebooks are coming out, man. They're not even doing any. There's no more play tests, right? Because none of the for the core 2024 core rulebook revisions, right? And the reason why is there's no more time to put any of those changes in effect, right? So so basically, that's where we land, right? Like, and so basically, any changes that are going to come into D&D for the next 3 years have to come through Dungeon Masters, right? They can't come through design because there's no way like that basically it's set. Those books are going to print, right? So there's not going to be any real functional, structural design changes to Dungeons & Dragons through the designers. But that's okay because Gary provisioned us, and every Hasbro D&D designer also provisioned us to change Dungeons & Dragons, to make it better. So there are a host of changes in Matt Forbeck's Marvel Multiverse RPG that demand there are improvements on Dungeons and Dragons sitting in Marvel Multiverse RPG that demand change from every dungeon master who's trying to run the best possible game of Dungeons and Dragons they can, right? Now, if you're some sad sack out there, cutting goblins in half and everybody's gonna have fun at your table, move on. You got no business here. I got nothing for you, right? But if you're a dungeon master who cares, right, and is trying to change, learn, and grow through Dungeons and Dragons and make sure that no one ever walks away from your table without change, learning, and growing with Dungeons and Dragons, then you need to absolutely be paying attention to Marvel Multiverse RPG. So based on the length of this video, I thought I was going to get to one of those changes. I'm not. This video is simply a discussion about what critical this is simply a discussion about what critical changes need to happen in Dungeons and Dragons based on Marvel Multiverse RPG, and me explaining to you why Matt Forbeck's work demands change, structural, infrastructure level change from Dungeon Masters over the next 2 or 3 years. And I will, of course, give you additional videos explaining exactly what those changes are. Every single word of that is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.